their reflections. First, I'm going to introduce you to Professor Mavis Malutsi. Professor Malutsi is the South African Research Chair in Ubuntu Community Model in Nursing. She is a Professor of Nursing at the University of Pretoria with 37 years of professional experience. Prior to her appointment as SACHI Chair, Professor Malutsi was the Head of Department of Nursing Science for 10 years and the Chair of the School of Healthcare Sciences. She is currently the first Deputy President of DENOSA and the African Regional Coordinator of Sigma Theta Tau International. She is the Executive Member of the Global Nurses and Midwives Rotary Club. Last, she is also Editor-in-Chief of Curie Tionis. Next, I want to introduce you to Professor Trevor Hill. Professor Hill trained as a physical geographer with a focus on paleoecology. Have taught a diverse array of courses from biogeography, GIS, ecology, natural resource management, through to wildlife science. He's a big believer in being in the field and getting your hands dirty. At present, Trevor is academic leader of research within the School of Agricultural, Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Trevor is former co-editor of the South African Journal of Geography, presently editor of Transactions of Royal Society of South Africa, and interim editor for Journal of Geography Education in Africa. Trevor is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, South African Geographical Society, and Royal Society of South Africa. Trevor has published over 100 papers, book chapters, and graduated 90 MSc and PhD students. His research interests tend to be rather eclectic, and one could be polite and call it transdisciplinary. His dream is to get back into the lab, avoid admin, and count pollen. Next, we will have Professor Gerard van den Heever. Gerard van den Heever retired as full professor at the University of South Africa at the end of 2022, though he's still on a one-year fixed-term contract. After a long career as senior lecturer and associate professor, as well as a short stint as minister in a church. He teaches courses in New Testament and early Christian studies. His research focuses on the Gospel of John in its Greco-Roman context. Greek and Roman religions, especially the transformations in religious formations from the classical to the late antique period, history of religion, and contemporary theory of religion. Of late, his research explores sociology of knowledge, meta-theory, and transdisciplinarity in the field of the study of religion. Sounds interesting. Current projects include an international colloquium on mapping transformations towards a Christian late antiquity, as well as publications of essays on twilights of Greek and Roman religions and the deaths of ancient religions. Gerard is also the editor-in-chief of Religion and Theology. Next, we will have Dr. Wallace Chuma. Wallace Chuma is an associate professor of media studies in the Center for Film and Media Studies at the University of Cape Town. He's a former journalist and editor in Zimbabwe and has worked for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in the United States as an Alfred Friendly Press Fellow. Chuma holds a PhD in media studies from Wits University and has published widely in peer-reviewed local and international journals, as well as in books. His research interests are in media policy, political communication, and the politics of representation. He's also editor of the journal African Journalism Studies. Last, we will have Dr. Gemma Finch. Gemma Finch is an associate professor in geography at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She holds a PhD from the University of York in the UK. Following her PhD, Gemma returned to South Africa as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Cape Town, before taking up a lectureship at UKZN in 2011. A paleoecologist by training, Gemma uses plant and animal remains preserved in sediments to understand past climate and environmental change. Gemma is an NRF C2 rated scientist and is the recipient of the 2021 UKZN Vice Chancellor's Research Award. She is an associate editor for the South African Journal of Science in the field of archaeology, anthropology, and paleontology. She teaches undergraduate biogeography and environmental change and has special interests in fieldwork-based training and in developing scientific writing skills. I also want to recognize at this morning's meeting our ASIF representatives. Dr. Linda Fick, who is the managing editor of the ASIF Journal, South African Journal of Science, she was the organizer of this webinar, but unfortunately, due to a family crisis, cannot be here today. We've already heard from Susan Veldsman, who is the director of the Scholarly Publishing Unit. Then in the audience, I've seen Nadia Grobler, who is the online publishing systems administrator for the South African Journal of Science. And then last, I think she's in the audience, Louise van Heerden, who's Skylo SA Operations Manager. As I've said previously, the arrangement now is that each of our 5 panelists will reflect for 10 minutes on their experience as editor of an academic journal. When there's 1 minute remaining of your 10-minute allocation, I will unmute myself and just make you aware of that, but then we're going to start. I'm now going to ask Professor Mavis Malutsi if you can please share with us your experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for introducing me and for the introduction that we have done. I'm just going to share my experience as a journal editor. I'm the chief editor of Creationist Journal, which is a nursing journal. Indeed, I have been doing this for the past 8 years. I started in 2014. Indeed, this is a prestigious work. It can build your career, and it is really a powerful position. However, there's lots of work. It is very demanding. In many instances, there's no compensation. And if there's something that I had known before I could take this position, it was the issue of work-life balance. It demands a lot of your time. So you have to set time aside. As much as you could be able to look at this every day, but you need a blocked time that you need to have to look at the manuscripts. And that really impacted so much in my life, but I managed to try and balance the journal, your responsibilities at the university, and also your life as a person, your social life and your family. So it was really quite an eye-opener for me. I really enjoyed doing this. And what does it entail to be an editor? You evaluate submission to determine whether they fit the journal. You look at the scope of those manuscripts and the scope of the journal, and you also look at the editorial criteria. You initiate the review process and oversee the review process. The interesting part is when you communicate the outcome of the review process to the authors. Quite interesting. I'll talk about it a little bit later when I talk about challenges. You also advise them on the revisions and you communicate the editorial decision. I think one of the challenges is the issue of that we all know. Hannah Arendt said, you publish or perish culture. This, I am quoting, he said that the business of publish or perish has been a catastrophe. People write things which should never have been written and which should never be printed. Nobody's interested. But for them to keep their jobs and get the proper promotion, they've got to do it. And in the process, it demeans the whole of intellectual life. So when you are an editor, you struggle with looking at the quality of the manuscript that you are receiving. And that really brings a lot of challenges to you as an editor. The peer review process on itself is a nightmare. Finding the reviewers has become more and more difficult, more especially so because there's no incentive for reviewers. And the reviewers are usually from the academic environment where they already have a lot of work. So it becomes very difficult to even get the reviews in the specified times because you also have to sometimes understand that they've got a lot of workloads, but in the process, you want to ensure that the authors are also getting their reports back. Misunderstanding the purpose of peer review is also a challenge. Some reviewers, when they are reviewing, it is like they think that I should have written this article in this manner, instead of reviewing what they are reading at that particular time. That really frustrates you as an editor because when those reports comes back, you really feel frustrated because assessing the reviewer's comments is also a challenge. And you have to sometimes handle differences between authors and reviewers. The authors have written their manuscript and they have done the research already, but their reviewers want it to have been done in a total different way. And that really brings a lot of challenge. You deal with upset authors, and the most important challenging part is when you reject a manuscript. That is a very challenging part because sometimes you'll find that that person is senior to you in terms of, she has been writing for a very long time. She's even B-rated or, she has got a better rating than what you have. But then the work that has been written and what the reviewers are saying, you're agreeing with it. So when you say rejection, it really, causes misunderstanding between you and your colleagues. Now you go to a conference, the professor that liked you so much can no longer greet you, or she doesn't look you straight in your eyes again the way you used to. And those are some of the things that are really very frustrating, but you have to have a thick skin if you are doing this job. And the reviewers in the process sometimes frustrate both reviewers and authors, and there will be delayed publishing times. Turnaround times sometimes makes the information that people wanted to publish to be outdated. I can give example of the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was a lot that people wanted to publish, and then there was a lot of delays in the process. And sometimes you'll find that this information is no longer valuable. It's no longer something that people would want to read and so on. So time management is also very important, but sometimes it's beyond your control. And then sometimes you look at the tight publishing deadlines versus quality of the manuscripts and reviews. And that really frustrates you as an editor. So the other thing is that academic publishing by its nature is elitist because it's always academics that are publishing. I am from the health field. You'll find that there's a lot that is happening in hospitals and so on, but the practitioners don't usually publish. Sometimes you'll find is the issues of page fees that they do not have. Sometimes it's the issues of skills that they do not have, although we sometimes try to find ways of encouraging them, but you realize that this is often a challenge. And articles behind paywalls that is not accessible to the public, I think that is also a very big challenge. We publish in journals and sometimes the public don't see the information that is very important for them. And indeed, I've already said that one of the main challenges is strained relationship with colleagues. But then it is not only those challenges, there are benefits of being an editor. You know, you have that opportunity to shape the scholarly work in your field. In the nursing field, you know that as an editor, I'm a gatekeeper. I can allow this, I can say this is not what is supposed to be done, and I can even shape the article that came in a form that it is not publishable to be published. So that really fulfills you. And
sorry to interrupt, Professor, but there's 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Getting this, thank you. Mentoring of scholars through feedback, I think that is also very important. You gain a lot of networks because people start knowing you and they start communicating with you. You improve your research profile and you learn a lot from what other people are publishing. So if you can ask me what are the lessons learned, I think it helped me to improve writing skills. You become a critical reader. And in the process, you also learn, you know, soft skills like being empathetic with authors. You become a good mentor. And of course, you have to be thick-skinned. You cannot afford to be fragile when you're doing this work because sometimes you have to make very difficult decisions. Then, of course, there is professional growth. What can I say to the new editors that are coming? If you are going to be an editor of a journal, you have to be a visionary. Determine a journal vision with your editorial board. Build talented authors and reviewers. You can offer training so that people can know what is expected of them as authors and also as reviewers. You also need administrative support, and your university or your school must also support you by trying to lessen the workload because they know the type of work that they're doing, and that gives it gives you self-esteem, and it also promotes the name of your university and your school. So they definitely have to support you in that. And one thing that I have learned very late in my career as an editor is to use sub-editors. That really lessens your work. Ever since I started using sub-editors, I really think that we're doing very good work. We could sometimes discuss some of the challenges. I can ask someone to look at the review if there is a dispute and all that. And I really think with the support of editorial members, this is a very good journey to embark in. Really, if you are interested in being an editor, find a way of being an editor. It really promotes scholarship. Being a gatekeeper for your profession, I think is a prestigious work that you are doing, and you will leave a legacy for your profession. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mulotsi. Appreciate those insights. Audience, I just want to encourage you, even though I said hold your questions for the 50 minutes at the end, you are welcome to post comments and questions in the chat whilst the presentation is ongoing. I also want to encourage the use of the reactions like thumbs up or hand clap when my presenters say something that you especially identify with. So please make use of those. Next, we're going to hear reflections from Professor Trevor Hill. Trevor, I see you've unmuted yourself and started your video. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to come here this morning. And just in terms of the icons, I noticed there's not one for thumbs down. Often when I give classes, I'm sure mine should go thumbs down rather than thumbs up. During the previous speaker, I was just having, just mulling over a couple of thoughts and scribbling some notes. And at the end of the day, really, it is the advantages far outweigh the limitations in this role. I really do. I see it as a role rather than a job. And so for those that are emerging or those that are thinking about it, it really is, it is a rewarding job. It is a rewarding role to play within your discipline and within the broader community, academic community within South Africa. I started doing this probably about 10 years ago now. I'm one of the oldies at the job. And the very first paper I dealt with was conflict. The first paper that came in, there were two sets of authors that were having a go at each other. And the previous editors just left that on my doorstep and said, here we go. You're the new editor, take over. And so my introduction was rather a little bit of baptism of fire, where I've got two groups of sub-disciplines within geography that will remain nameless, that didn't want to talk to each other and were using the journal as their vehicle of conflict, if you like. So I really did start off in a bit of the deep end, but so be it. One of the main reasons for me getting involved was I felt that I should be giving a little bit more back to my own discipline. And I saw that being both geography and also education, which is what we do for a living. And so I wanted to be more involved. I was pretty poor at attending conferences. I'm not a big person for these conferences and networking and that. And so I actually sat down and thought, what could I give back to the society? What could I give back? And many of our journals in South Africa are linked to particular societies, be that zoology, botany, geology, whatever it may be. And so I wanted to be involved in the Geography Society's journal. I was fortunate in that there was an advert. I applied, successful, and away we went. And I found that I actually really enjoy the role. I do. Maybe it's a little bit altruistic because I get to read all the papers before other people do. So I get to see what's coming in, which is quite nice. I quite enjoy doing that. And I enjoy the relationship because, as I said, many of these journals are linked to societies and we know each other. So, for example, in geography or in education, we know who the players are in South Africa and within Southern Africa. And so I can ask or call upon these people to help me review the papers. And I know everybody's going to say one of the problems is finding reviewers. But yes, I agree, it is a problem. But if you know a lot of the people, if you know the people in your discipline, I can often personalize those emails and say, come on, so-and-so, you owe me a paper. You haven't done one for me this year. Or, next time I meet you, I'll buy you a beer if you're prepared to do this. So I find it quite, if I personalize things, reviewers they then can't say no. And so I'm able to get quite a the reviews out of people. In terms of the role I think we play as editors, I think it goes so much more further than we're normally aware of. And I would like emerging editors just to be aware of it, I think, that yes, we have to read through the paper and sometimes do a desk reject. But again, bearing in mind, often we are not experts in that sub-discipline. So we've got to be careful about doing that and how far we go. Then we, of course, have to find reviewers, and that is a job, and that takes quite a lot. I do it a particular way. Other editors will have other ways of doing it. I will not only read through the paper, but I will then start looking in the paper itself, what authors the paper tends to use and the direction it's going. And then I will turn to Google Scholar and use Google Scholar to help me find who's published in that field in the last 2 or 3 years. So there are multiple ways of finding reviewers. I think also, though, as editor, we've got to realize our relationship not only with authors, but sometimes supervisors who get hold of us and say, my student has submitted a paper. But we also have to build a relationship with our editorial boards. We have a responsibility to make sure that we've got an up-to-date, good, diverse editorial board. but also our relationship with the publishers are quite important. I work with Taylor and Francis quite substantially, and I believe I have a very good relationship with Taylor and Francis, having gone so far as to go to the headquarters in the UK and actually meet the person responsible for the South African journals. And that is critical, is to understand many of those people in the publishing sector are former academics or people that know the academic field. They're not just desktop publishers. They actually, and many of them are researchers themselves. And building a relationship, working with those people really does help, I think. So you know, those are some of the positives. I'm just looking down my notes here. Limitations, yes, it is a lot of work. But if you get into a system and a routine and you check your papers coming in, I don't struggle with that. Where I do struggle is, particularly in the South African system at the moment, is often we see manuscripts come in that you can very quickly see are not ready to be published. They're often not ready to go back out for review, but it's from a PhD candidate who requires a manuscript number to submit their thesis for examination at their university. And that is a real big issue for me at the moment. And so these papers are coming in and you think, great, yes, perfect, but it's not ready to go for review. And you kind of feel a bit frustrated that they've submitted too early and they're doing it purely because they want that manuscript number so they can submit their PhDs. And so, you know, that is something that I have a bit of a problem with and something that we need to work through at the moment. One thing that I do find very rewarding is dealing with special issues. I like it when because a special issue, I've kind of put quite a lot of work in. I will often attend a conference and I will talk about the journal and make suggestions, because also as editor, we've got to do the PR work as well. We can't just rely on our publishers. So we've actually got to make sure that people know, and we're competing with other journals. You know, myself, I sit on as the editor-in-chief of the Transactions, and joining us this morning is also Professor Finch, and she is in the editor of the South African Journal of Geography. And so often we're competing for exactly the same papers, and we think, you know, like it should come to us, no, it should go to you, kind of thing. And that does happen. And so I often push the journal at conferences and at workshops and make suggestions. But when you do that, our journal is now making the effort to actually work with some of the emerging academics, the younger emerging academics, and say, right, send the paper to us, we'll go through it, and then we will work with you, particularly for special issue, to see whether it's feasible to actually, and of course, it still goes through the review process. We're not making favors, but helping these people, because to publish that first or second paper is really, really difficult for emerging academics. So we're finding ways of actually helping these people, not doing a professional edit, but in terms of building the structure of the paper so that it is ready to go for a review process. And then to run all that, have these special issue, you know, papers together and get a bundle of 8 or 10 papers and then put that together as a special issue and get that out. That's great for me. That really is something I enjoy doing. So yeah, from that side of it, it's critical. But lessons learned, something I would like more of that I didn't know about when I joined the game, and that is the legality, the legal sides of copyright and the problems you can get in when, for example, an author doesn't declare where their funding comes from, and how many years subsequent to getting that funding do they still have to declare that they've got the funding for the research. Those kinds of issues, you know, I was oblivious to those. But if something like that does happen to you, it hits you fast and can become a problem quite quickly. And then you've got to turn to your publishing company for advice and for help. And then
Professor, sorry to interrupt, but no just problem. To say that you've got a minute left. Okay, thank you.
I'm on my last point, thank you. And no, I've forgotten what I was going to say. No, I haven't. What it was is also that don't just think South Africa. Also, as young emerging academics, to get involved as assistant editorships of international journals, because I find that many of these journals are a little bit ahead of South Africa in terms of their philosophy and approach, where they will actually help emerging academics more, they provide more resources, and they provide more support. And I've learned a lot from being involved in external international journals as well about the way to go forward and what we can bring to our own journals in South Africa. I'll stop at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those insights, Professor Hill. Much appreciated. I'm now going to call on Professor Gerard van der Heever to give us his reflections. Thank you that your camera is on. Please go ahead.
Well, I have to say, oh my goodness, almost everything I thought should be said has now already been said. I'll just add a little bit of tidbits. My own history as editor is quite different, I think, quite unconventional. I've started in some editorial capacity with this journal in 1990, when it was still an in-house journal with another name at the university and aimed at postgraduate students. And gradually it became something more elevated and an accredited journal. Eventually it was, the title was acquired by Brill Academic Publishers, and I've since 98 been the editor of the journal. So I must be one of the longest serving editors for Brill Academic Publishers. So it's quite a unique situation, but what makes it a bit exasperating is that I get no support from the university, no teaching reduction, no assistance, anything. So I'm chef, cook, and bottle washer all in one. So you can ask me anything. I also do the proofreading and the copy editing. So I've learned a hell of a lot about English and good academic English, even though it's not my first language. So what do I have to contribute? Having been so long involved in journal editing, the one thing you learn is you take legal responsibility for what you publish. So you can't see yourself as editor as a clerk, a filing clerk, just ticking the boxes. What do the reviewers say? Yes, no, whatever. So I read every contribution 3 times when it comes in, after reviewing to do the copy editing, and I do the proofreading. So I have a pretty good idea of what is appearing in the journal. The other thing, once you've done it over so long a time, you become aware of mission creep. Journals do change. As disciplines shift, journals shift, and you're part of that. And also what contributes to that is if you begin to try to be heard internationally, you discover there are so many journals doing the same type of thing that you are doing. So over the years, we had to renegotiate the niche that religion and theology will serve in the broader publication program of Brill. So instead of being this generalist journal publishing anything and everything remotely connected to religion and theology, where we started, we are now pushing that specific niche of understanding insider language of religion in terms of the outsider language. So more meta theory, transdisciplinary, considering the critical foundations of the discipline. That means that you not only need to know yourself, but you need to know the field, the broader field you serve. You need to know the journal and its history, but you also need to know the publishing world. So you need to get along with publishers, and you need to be able to solicit their support and understanding for where you want to steer the journal to. I've been in the very fortunate position with Brill. I can speak Afrikaans to them. They love writing back in Dutch to me, and there's some kind of shared cultural connection between us. So it's a very, very good working relationship we have. They've been extremely supportive of me personally, also in my field. one thing you do really need, and it's especially acute when you edit a journal that is on this transdisciplinary, metadiscipline, interdisciplinary field, is to get an editorial board that shares the same vision. You really need to work hard on that. It also means, because you'll get submissions that will not fit in a specific smaller disciplinary niche, you will have problems getting willing reviewers, because one thing you often hear is, well, I'm not an expert in that. So you really need to be quite creative in that sense. Maybe the last thing I would like to add here is do not hesitate to be courageous. As was already mentioned, if you hear papers at conferences that will suit very well in your journal, and with some tweaking and twirling, and you can suggest that to the presenter, if you do this, that, or the other, it will fit with this journal very well. Solicit essays. I sometimes commission theme issues or subcontract theme issues with guest editors. These are not unproblematic to do that, because it really adds some complexity to how to manage the journal. But theme issues really are, for me, some of the most rewarding experiences, things I've published. And sometimes theme issues happen all of themselves, when it just so happens that you get papers that sort of link together, not consciously, but you can connect them through your introduction. And that is something I often do, is write an editorial introduction explaining why these essays were selected and what is it that binds them together. And often that means that I need to do some research and write a 10-page, almost freestanding article to bind it all together. And that has sometimes been the most rewarding growth experiences for me, because I write about things and I read about things I would not normally have done. And an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary journal really forces you to do that. So you provide your commentary through your introduction. And once you see that issue in print, I sometimes feel, wow, that was worth doing. And I'm quite happy then. But the work, as has already been intimated, also has its frustrations. And in the next issue of Amfasa magazine, you'll see my published exasperated editor's letter to authors, where I unpack all my frustrations, because authors can really also impose inappropriately on you, and sometimes throw stuff at you that you have to deal with, but that you should not needed to have to deal with. It comes for me at a bit of a personal cost. I get no teaching reduction. I teach 5 courses per semester. Having my postgraduate students and things to attend to academic citizenship tasks. And then
Sorry to interrupt, Professor, just to say that there's a minute left. Thank you.
And I'm almost at the full stop. So I'm just closing there, saying it's been very rewarding, because you help shape the field and the discipline. So it's not just nothing that you do. It's a very responsible task to be an editor. But if you see over time how the field grows, partly also because of your input, that's immensely rewarding. Thank you for that. for the time to present.
Thank you, Professor van der Heever. You set a very high standard. I'm just thinking how many times you in detail read those manuscripts. But thank you for those insights. I'm next calling on Dr. Wallace Chuma to share with us his experience. Yes, Wallace, you put your camera on. Thanks for that. After 9 minutes, I will unmute on my side and just remind you that you've only got a minute left, but please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Chair, and greetings to everyone here in attendance. My name is Wallace Chuma. I'm editor of African Journalism Studies, formerly called Equid Novi. The journal started in 1980, so it's been around for 4 decades. It's one of the sort of foremost journalism and media studies journals on the African continent. I took up this post in 2018, so which is 5 years now. Previously, I was involved in the journal. In fact, it was the first journal to publish my article when I was a doctoral student at WITS. So I was associated with it in many instances. After that, I was a board member. My presentation is kind of unstructured. So I'll speak from all over the place, but I hope that by the end, you'll be able to pick up 1 or 2 things. My background is in journalism and media studies. And as the chair said, I was a journalist in Zimbabwe and also an editor. The last 2 years of my career as a journalist in Zimbabwe, I was an editor of a weekly. So when I took up the editorship of African Journalism Studies, I could refer to my previous experience, although there's also a remarkable difference between editing a newspaper that appears once a week and an academic journal, which has to go through a peer review process, which is quite rigorous. Just a couple of things in respect to my experience. Like previous speakers have noted, this is a labor of love. Primarily, it's a labor of love. There isn't a salary that comes attached to this work. It's about your own sort of intrinsic contribution to knowledge and to deepening the field. That's how I take this job. And I'm not sure about other colleagues, but there isn't much support, institutional support from the universities that we work for. So you cannot bargain and have sort of reduced teaching hours or any other form of sort of administrative work. So, which is ironic because when, the journal publishing is a key part of the work that we do, and it should be, I think, sort of recognized as such. So it's essentially a labor of love. And it takes a lot of time. The first speaker, I think it was Professor Malaudzi, spoke to the work-life balance that comes with sort of this kind of job. Manuscripts come at all hours of the day, and in our case, we put together a system where when a manuscript is submitted, there is an editorial assistant who goes through the initial checks, plagiarism cases, compliance with editorial submission guidelines, word count, et cetera. Then it comes to me as editor to look at it, do the second round of gatekeeping before assigning that to associate editors. We've got 5 in our journal who then go through the article manuscript and then decide on the review process, sent to the reviewers, et cetera. So it's a kind of structured process. At every stage, I have to, as editor, to check how things are going. Where is this manuscript in the system? Not only because I need to ensure at the end of the day that, the publication, the journal comes out on time. We've got 4 issues annually, but also because there will be writers and authors sending sometimes quite rude emails to follow up on their manuscripts. That's also, I think where the first speaker said, you need to have a thick skin. Authors can be quite brutal when they follow up, in the same way that reviewers are also, or can be brutal when they give feedback to the manuscripts. So the whole management of that manuscript submission through to publication is quite involving, quite intensive in terms of the requirements of my time as editor. Another thing is that when I have to follow up on reviewers, and this is also not a very easy process. Some reviewers simply don't, indicate whether they're available or not. Initially, with a system which was not kind of intuitive because it didn't allow you, it didn't tell you that reviewer A has declined. So you'd sit with the system and thinking that you've sent a manuscript, only to find that it hasn't been acted upon after 3 months. So there is, as editor, I have to be working with associate editors. I have also to look at the productions people, the Scholar One people as well, to ensure that it's a whole complicated process. At the end of the day, you need a product that comes, if I can use that terminology of a product, which is also quite problematic. The other thing I need to highlight is the fact that you also need to market the journal. Again, so publishing is no longer just something esoteric you do from your corner. You need to be known. People need to know that there is African journalism studies. One of doing that is to be present at conferences. So we have at our journal a prize, an annual prize for the best paper in one of the major conferences in our industry, in our field called IMCR. International Association of Media and Communication Research. So that's something that we maybe other sort of upcoming journal editors should also consider. Be present, market that journal. It should be read. People should know about it. Of course, it's good for the metrics as well. People download more. But also the other thing that I need also to state is that certainly in my case, I'm getting so many terrible submissions from people, wannabe scholars, young scholars who put their bachelor's or master's or maybe mid-PhD, who want to try luck. It was just one of probably 4 or 5 journals on the continent. So the quality becomes very tricky. At the same time, you want to encourage young voices to get into the field, to publish, but then you also have to deal with quality issues. You send a manuscript to a reviewer who say, and the reviewer is some established scholar who says, no, I can't work with this quality of work. So you're stuck between, on the one hand, trying to insist on the quality of the journal, the quality of the journal is known for, on the other, to try to also open the door for young scholars who want to get into the field. You have to start from somewhere. So we need to have that space for young emerging scholars as well, whose quality may not be the best in terms of presentation. So you need to deal with that. The other thing is that you need to constantly be on the lookout for changes within the field, developments in the field. Our field is journalism, media studies, communication, which is more or less like researching a moving target, targeting a moving target, if you like, because, when I started the journal, there was no ChatGPT. Now people are researching about that. Digital ecologies are shifting the way journalism is practiced. So we are constantly thinking around changing the focus of the journal, broadening it. So that also is a very interesting space where, with my editorial team, we meet regularly and say, okay, where are the changes? What's happening in the field? Where should we focus? And of course, the special issue that the other gentleman spoke to is very important as well. Have them as many as possible, but also they have to be relevant, timely. At our journal, we run a special issue every year, which is called the African Digital Media Review, which specifically focuses on digital media, and we run it annually. So that also helps in terms of even getting, more, I wanted to say likes, more downloads for our articles, because people are researching more around digital media. So there is also the issue of integrity. Obviously, you have to be a person of integrity, no cutting corners. Sometimes your friends, colleagues, get rejections. Deal with it. It will affect friendships, but it's a peer review process. There's nothing else you can do as editor.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. I wanted to give you advantage of an extra couple of minutes because you're from UCT. But now you were speaking about being ethical. So you've got a minute left. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I like the way the chair politely reminds you that time is up. But there's so much to say. This is to just young editors. This is a labor of love. Do it. Also consult. This is teamwork. Get good people around yourself. You are equally passionate about this academic project, but also lastly, get a good editorial board. Many of the people are sitting in boards doing absolutely nothing. Get young people or active scholars into boards who are able to give time to review. In my case, our board members should have at least three articles that they should review per year. So get them busy, get them working. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks.
Thanks, Professor Chuma. Thank you for those insights. I think very valuable to our audience. Next up and last, we've got Dr. Gemma Finch from UKZN, but Gemma, I also see there's a little bit of UCT in your history, so please go ahead.
I was hoping you might notice. Give me some favoritism as well. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much again for the invitation to speak. I'm the only one with slides, and I'm also the new kid on the block. This is a webinar aimed at new editors, and I am myself a relatively new editor. I'm representing the South African Journal of Science, where I'm an associate editor, and I'm going to reflect on my experiences over the last couple of years. So my editorial journey, as I said, I'm relatively new in the game. I think like many others, I started getting invitations to peer review as a PhD and a postdoc. I was fortunate in that my PhD supervisor kindly allowed me the opportunity to co-review papers together with him, which was a fantastic way to learn the peer review process as a PhD student and get that exposure. So that was very fortunate for me. Obviously, many of us have also experienced peer review from the side of the author many, many times. And I think it is always valuable to see the process from both sides in order to be empathetic towards the author when one is acting as an editor or in an editorial role. And then also the university has on occasion offered peer review workshops to try and upskill staff. So some degree of training there, but really rather limited, to be honest. And I was finding myself 10 years post-PhD, having undertaken very many peer reviews and published a fair bit, but really seeking editorial opportunities and not at that stage having been invited to sit on an editorial board or to have an opportunity to act as an editor. However, South African Journal of Science came to my rescue in a sense, in that they offer this associate editor mentoring program, which I think is a fantastic initiative. And I was fortunate to apply and be accepted. I was able to work under Dr. Margaret Avery and work alongside her for a year and really learn the ropes that way. So it was a little bit of an unusual entry into my editorial role, but I found it very valuable. It was a very rigorous program, and there were a vast array of different tasks that were associated with the program by way of goals to look to achieve within the year. So when that program came to an end, I was fortunate to be allowed the opportunity to take over from Margaret as associate editor for this portfolio within the South African Journal of Science, and I've been doing that for about a year now. So in terms of responsibilities, obviously a lot of this has already been said, but the core business of being an editor clearly is around facilitating the peer review process and also reviewing other content for the journal. For instance, in our case, the front section of the journal, book reviews, commentaries, and that sort of thing. So that's the core business, which has been spoken about quite a bit. I'm not going to spend any time there, but I did want to mention some of the other roles, perhaps lesser highlighted roles, although I think Dr. Chuma did mention the marketing role. So promoting your journal, and yeah, I think I've been fairly active with helping to market the journal, circulating flyers and merchandise at conferences, and trying to encourage collaborators and colleagues to publish within the journal, really promoting awareness around the journal, and soliciting manuscript submissions, I've already said. So that type of thing. Also preparing actual contents and submissions for the front section of the journal, so helping to generate content for commentaries and so on. So there's a number of ways in which we can promote our journals. And then I feel that this was a bit of a surprise to me, I guess, that the South African Journal of Science does a lot of work to develop early career researchers in a variety of different ways. So they run an annual peer review workshop, as well as an annual writing workshop. We have a monthly journal writing and peer review forum, which is open to any early career researchers to come and learn about the peer review process and ask any questions about publication issues that they may be facing. So we have that open forum once a month. And then, of course, this associate editor and mentorship program, which, a few journals have similar programs, but I just wanted to highlight it again as the route by which I was able to get involved with the journal, but also the fact that there is currently a call open. So if there are young researchers looking for editorial experience, I highly recommend it from a personal point of view. Some challenges, I had to think about this hard. I mean, there are general challenges, but I enjoy this role so much. I needed to think carefully about what I wanted to say here. I think the technicalities of learning the journal submission system takes a little bit of time, and it's different for different journals. So one needs to learn to be comfortable with those submission systems. I don't personally find it too difficult, but I know it is something that the editors do battle with, and sometimes the authors battle with from time to time. The big one, of course, is turnaround time for peer review, and finding peer reviewers, the right peer reviewers who will deliver those review reports timeously and not slow the process down. I don't want to be in a position where I'm the one delaying the peer review process. So that question of time management and, of course, work-life balance, that one is critically important here. So just to make sure that I'm not the one delaying the process, and that those review invitations are out and I'm chasing and facilitating. And then, because I'm responsible for archaeology, anthropology, and paleontology at a multidisciplinary journal, it's quite a specialist field. And I personally find it quite challenging at times to balance that specialist material and subject matter with something that should be accessible to a more wider audience, shall we say. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. I'd rather spend time on the rewards, and there are many of them, so I'll try not to take too long. But I've really thoroughly enjoyed being part of the sort of behind the scenes look at the publication process. I really enjoy seeing how everything happens and being part of that. Also working together with a very supportive editorial team. It's a good feeling working together with a team and feeling supported by my editor-in-chief, managing editor, and so on. I personally get a little bit of a buzz out of finding the right reviewer. Sometimes we really just, when you send that review out, you get a response straight away. You can see the reviewer is extremely interested. And when you see the review report, you just know that you approached the right person. That's always very satisfying. It's been mentioned already, but of course we are responsible for stuff that is not directly within our specialization, so sort of slightly adjacent subfields, and being able to read a bit more broadly as part of serving on the editorial team, I think is quite enriching as a scientist. So that's been fantastic. Of course, broadening my network and all those invitations going out and chatting with researchers over email as potential peer reviewers or as authors, that's interpersonally, that's quite enjoyable. And clearly it's important for building your own personal profile as a researcher. So these roles, all the responsibilities and work that comes with them, but they are also very good for our own careers. I think being able to witness the improved scientific quality through peer review, you know, we know in theory it happens, of course, and we see it with our own papers once they go through peer reviews, but to see it in other people's work and sometimes to see quite marked improvements with various specialist inputs, that's also very satisfying and rewarding. Each paper that appears in print, as exciting as it is when it's your own paper and you're the author, even for the editor, I find it exciting, probably because I'm a newbie, but I really enjoy that. And especially if those publications then go on to garner interest in the media or are high profile for some reason, then even more so, that reward is great. And then finally, I've mentioned the developmental work that we do at SAJS, and even those monthly peer review and journal writing forums, having the chance to interact with ECRs across Africa, sometimes beyond, I find that also very rewarding, and it's nice to give back. Okay, and then very briefly, I've mentioned the ECR development, capacity development. That's something I think we should obviously be focusing on, continuing with, and doing wherever possible. Clearly part of my role in terms of the promotion, marketing, and improving the profile of the journal, that's an important part of my role and something that I need to focus on going forward. I think because I'm quite new in this role, you know, we've spoken about needing a thick skin, and I think that does come with time. It can be hard to deal with researchers who are way more senior than you, and to be sitting on the other side taking an editorial decision can be intimidating, and it is difficult, especially where it's a borderline decision or a complicated decision, and we do deal with many of those, of course. So I think with experience comes the confidence to deal with those situations and to realize that it's not personal. With publication, this is not a personal attack or criticism. This is about improving the science, and we should all be working as a community towards that goal. And this is my last point. It's my last point. I promise you I'm done. Yeah, and then for me personally, because I so thoroughly enjoy this role, as much as it does take time, I would like to do more of it. So as an academic, you know, we juggle many responsibilities and we're very busy, but this is one of the ones that I am thoroughly enjoying. I'd like exposure to more journals. I'm on an editorial board for another journal internationally, but I haven't had too much opportunity to interact there. So all these chances to sort of grow your experience, they can be extremely rewarding. And again, the rewards far outweigh those challenges and difficulties and the workload. So I would strongly encourage other people to go down this route. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights, Gemma. Much appreciated. Audience, we now go into our question and answer session. I just want to suggest that we do it this way. I'm going to ask my panelists while I'm speaking, can you please go through the questions and answers and the comments that's been made? Just look through them. And then audience, what I suggest is in the same sequence that they did speak, I'm going to call up each of my panel members and just ask them for a minute or two, just to respond to some of the issues that they've picked up in the questions and answers. And then at the same time, I will then open up the mic if any of the audience members then want to respond or go a little bit more in depth on one of the issues raised. If I can just ask that when we do go to the open mic that we keep to one person speaking at a time. So while I'm speaking, panel members, if you can just take the time to just look at the questions and the comments that's been raised already, and that is there on the chat and in the question and answers. To keep you busy, audience, just to give my panel members time, I'm just going to pick up on two issues that came through. The first one is a lack of institutional support. I think it was mentioned twice by my panelists, and it came up at our previous scholarly editors conference as well. And that is the idea that you have to do everything as an academic. You have to teach, you have to research, and then you have to edit journals at the same time. For the teaching and for the research, you get credit from your university, but it doesn't always feel like you get the necessary credit that is appropriate to the time that you have to invest for being an editor, or at the same time for being a reviewer of a paper. So just to say that as ASIF, we are aware of that and we are working on the issue. We've got a two-pronged approach. Hopefully, if it goes through all of its quality checks, ASIF will release a statement on the necessity of peer review and of being an editor in the South African system. We're trying to put the argument in front of our university administrators that this is essential. And then the other part of the approach would be we're hoping to survey all of our editors in the South African system to get detail of, number one, how much time is actually invested in the editorial role. You know, what type of credit do you get from the different universities in the South African system? We will then aggregate that information, try and establish this is the standard of credit that you get in the South African system for being a peer reviewer. And hopefully we'll then publish that as a paper, and then it can be used by our editors and peer reviewers when it comes to their performance appraisal discussions. So that is something that is on the cards already, but hopefully now my panel members have had a time to look at the questions. I'm going to go in the same sequence as what we presented. So I'm calling on Professor Mavis Malotsi, if you want to perhaps just respond to some of the issues you see raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see the first question is raised about how do we select sub-editors. The sub-editors were selected from the members of the editorial board and also from the people that were good reviewers. And I think what you do is when you have selected them, they have to go through training. And obviously during the process, there's also mentorship. If they are finding some things that are difficult for them, they communicate with me. And then I already had 2 other sub-editors, and that's what we are doing. We are mentoring them. We ensure that they are trained. And I think this process is working very well. And then the next question came.
Professor, sorry to interrupt, but just on that issue that you've raised, I've got an audience member, Betty, that has raised her hand. Betty, if you want to unmute yourself and just ask your question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all the presenters. We've really received very great insights into your editorship. I'm an editor myself of the African Journal of Governance and Development. I have 2 comments, actually 2 questions. The first one is, are we really gatekeepers? Or should we not be, rather, shouldn't we be seeing ourselves as gateways? Because if we are gatekeepers, it comes with certain connotations, and that is why we probably get these nasty looks in corridors. So I would rather we look at ourselves as gateways and function and respond to messages from that perspective. The other question I have to my fellow editors, and I think perhaps to ASAF in general, Elsevier, which is one of the big publishing houses, seems to have a nice relationship with ChatGPT. What is the status of ourselves as editors with regard to ChatGPT and other large language models? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Professor Malotsi, I don't see that they necessarily directly related with the point you were addressing, but I think as you continue now your commenting on the issues raised, if you want to respond to those or not, maybe some of the other panelists will do, but please go ahead.
Yes,
well,
supposed to respond to the second question, where they are asking, how do we get healthcare clinicians to publish in journals? And I think in health, we need good quality evidence and research. How can journals and editors encourage this? I think as journals and editors, we can encourage this by ensuring that when we do training for writing for publication, we also include clinicians, and we also include them when we do training for reviewers. And I think we have to work with hospitals to ensure that we provide time, and we also provide mentors, because a lot of information indeed for us, if we want to improve our science and if we want to provide evidence-based care, the clinicians are the ones that could assist us with more information. And the issue of gatekeepers, I think it was also raised by me. Yes, I think it's the issue of language, gatekeepers versus gateways, but all in all, what I was trying to say is that we have the authority to make decisions as to what is good science, and also that is also aided by the review process and the reports that we get from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I've got a hand raised from Susan Veldsman. Susan, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Philip. I would like to respond to the question about chat GPT. So the question by Betty Mubangizi, if I may.
Please go ahead, Susan.
Thank you. So I was curious to sort of learn where Betty say that Elsevier has a very, what did you call it, a nice relationship with ChatGPT. So on the one hand side, my question is, what is a nice relationship then with ChatGPT? We have, about a couple of weeks ago, we did a very quick survey under the editors of journals published in South Africa. And I think there were only about 3 or 4 responded that they are busy adjusting their policies to reflect on what influence ChatGPT would have on their journal, and how they should adjust their policies, just to be clear as well to stakeholders, to authors and to readers, as to how the editorial board actually view the role of ChatGPT in the editorial processes. It actually has some major implications and some very sort of deep questions which there's no clarity about at the moment. For instance, can ChatGPT be viewed as an author? What is sort of the legal standing of ChatGPT then, etc. And what about then, is it not perhaps viewed as plagiarism? You know, so there are many questions, etc. But we do find that editors are starting to formulate some policies for their journals around ChatGPT, just to be clear as to how they feel and how they perceive and how they will deal with ChatGPT generated text within manuscripts / articles, etc. Just want to say that on the 29th of June, we'll have an international webinar, which you'll all receive an invitation again, on ChatGPT and putting the right policies in place to ensure good governance within the editorial processes, etc. So we are having 3 international speakers, one of the AAAS scientific journals, the chairperson of COPE, which is a recognized organization in terms of publication ethics. And then thirdly, Authenticate, who will also present, as well as the South African editors who already have implemented some policies or are just about to implement some policies. Thank you for the opportunity, Philip.
Thank you, Susan. I've got a hand raised from Kakoma Luneta. please unmute yourself and ask your comment, make your comment or ask your question.
Thank you. I'm Luneta. I'm a new editor in the sense that I started a journal right from square A. Majority of you, I think, are fortunate enough to have just gotten a journal that had already been started. So as you are aware, it's not yet accredited by DHET. So our first issue, all the articles actually came from outside South Africa and not South African scholars. That's a concern, and we'll see how we get into being accredited maybe next year or so. Now, why I started the journal was that there ain't sufficient journals. That was my point. When I did my research, I found there were about 558 journals in Africa, of which a majority were in Nigeria, and South Africa, I think Ethiopia was second, and then South Africa was third, with I think about 96 or something like that journals. Now, my point is that as long as the editors have the thinking that they are gatekeepers, there's a certain amount of knowledge that I think will be subtly isolated. Because from the conversations that we've had here, I can see very well that as editors, you have strength. In other words, there's a certain type of knowledge that you would accept and others that you would reject. And as long as you regard ourselves as gatekeepers, there will be subtly some knowledge will be isolated, some communities will be isolated, some scholars will be isolated. That's my point number one. Point number two, I look at mentorship. I've had one of the editors who's been there for over 10 years, 15. How many youngsters have you mentored in this process? Why I say so is that take a review. Look at the majority of the South African journals. They are predominantly my editor colleagues are predominantly white. So these are issues that are sensitive to us as a people. How much knowledge are we disseminating to young South Africans, so that they take up roles of editorships and so on? So these are my concerns that I would like to share with the colleagues, and that on the back of your mind, we cherish the profession, we cherish the knowledge that you have, but on the back of your mind, you must always be thinking, how many young scholars am I bringing in so that they take over from me? You can't be sitting on that role for 30 years, and it's good. I know it's exciting. For instance, in my case, I've made sure that on the editorial board, 3 of my former doctoral students are on that board, because I don't want to sit there for another 4 or 5 years, probably. Otherwise, I want to move away, and they allow youngsters to take over. We must always have that on the back of our minds. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I just quickly want to comment, and that is just, you find your journal finds itself in a challenging space where you're not yet accredited by the DHET, and yet you want to attract papers, especially from South Africa. That is challenging, because the South African authors, that's the first thing that the universities are teaching them to look for. Can you get subsidy for your paper? What I also just want you to keep in mind, and we can probably take this offline, but in order for you to be accredited, you also have to fulfill, I would say, are you a South African journal? Now, our committee on scholarly publishing have established a few guidelines around whether a journal is a South African journal. So I'm just highlighting that. Just keep that in mind. That's one of the hurdles you'll have to get past, just to show that you are a South African journal to get accreditation. Janet, you've got your hand raised. Please unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Thank you very much, Philip. My question, I think, is a quick and short question. what is ASAF's policy regarding payment when you submit articles? I submitted an article recently to a local journal. I had to send proof of payment of 700 Rand before the journal was even accepted, before it was sent to review. I know we do pay page fees, but I don't know if there's a policy that ASAF has about this, but I felt it was really it just felt uncomfortable me paying this fee up front. If they were even going to reject my article, would I get that money back? I don't know. I mean, what is your policy? Thank you.
Okay, Susan, I would like in the background that you think about whether you've got a policy on that. All I can say, just from my experience, is the top journals in my field, often US-based journals, there you have to really think, do I have a chance before you send your paper in? Because of that, let's say $200 submission fee that you have to pay, and that will be lost if you are desk rejected. Let's give a little, Janet, we'll have to give. Okay, Susan has got a video on, so I think she's ready to say something. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Janet, for that question. No, ASAF doesn't have a policy. And in the Code of Best Practice, we have not addressed the article processing charges which are levied by some journals as such. I think what's important for me, and I know there's a practice that before they do anything, some journals actually raise this money, that before they do something, you have to pay up front. And I absolutely agree with you. It is actually quite uncomfortable to think, they will not do anything not before you've paid. I see that as a very a questionable practice, because my question also would be, do they state somewhere in the policies of the journal what that monies will be used for? Because that is the one thing we do advocate. If you do charge monies for articles to be published in your journal, like article processing charges, be clear as to why you're doing it, for what will you be using it, be open about the budget of your journal. But I agree with you, I don't think we have a formally set sort of policy towards raising that monies before they do anything. But I think from my point of view, it's really a questionable practice as to why do they want that, rather than do article processing charges once your article is being accepted for review, is maybe then you can pay, but not beforehand. It is rather strange that they do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just say that the money has been doubled from 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, it was 250 Rand. Now it's 700 Rand. I mean, when is it going to stop? Is it,
Yeah, no, then I would respond, they must rather look at other sort of models and how they would recover the cost for the journal, but upfront is questionable, really. I think I'm a believer from that you can raise some monies and funds much later in the process, like other journals do, not really upfront. That is quite difficult to deal with.
Thanks for that response, Susan. I'm going to ask Trevor, Professor Hill. You've had an opportunity to look at the questions and comments. Are there perhaps any that you want to pick up on? Thanks, Trevor.
Oh, thanks. You leave me in the firing line, don't you? Well, in response to Janet's comment, I already typed an answer to you, and it sounds terrible. I would have pulled the paper straight away. I'm sorry. I know this is a practice of many journals of paying up front. I get it. But how many times have we heard in South Africa people talking about we're not publishing because we can't afford the page charges. We can't send it to that journal because we can't. And we find time and time again, and we said at all universities, that those with the big money are able to target the big journals simply because they can afford the page charges or submission fees. And I'm so against that. I get quite grumpy about it, to be honest, because we can't afford those prices. We are already on an uneven playing field in this country when we're trying to publish in international journals and journals with high impact factors. We often have papers rejected and we're unable to, add more, to get more lab time, lab space, or to afford the equipment to improve our data. And adding page charges to it just makes it worse. It really, really does. And so I'm sorry, I know journals do it, but I'm quite grumpy against it. I'd also like to pick up on ChatGPT, because I think maybe this is the stage where I'm too old and it's time for me to get out, because I remember my first papers being sent in duplicate with a paper clip in the corner to the editor by post in brown envelopes. And now, I mean, I work closely with Taylor and Francis, and I do appreciate that as soon as ChatGPT hit the market, the publishing companies see it as a threat. They're doing something about it. What Taylor and Francis have done is they've almost created like a clearinghouse. So the manuscripts, although they're uploaded, go to a central office that check for plagiarism, check for ChatGPT issues before the paper's actually sent to the editors. I've fought against that. I mean, I get what it's for, and I appreciate their support. I don't like it personally, because I find then that the paper sits in a clearinghouse for a week or 2 weeks, and the authors have been told they've got a manuscript number and the paper is in the system, but it hasn't got to me yet. And so that I think Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, and many and Wiley are being quite reactive at the moment. They haven't caught up. So I think we've got to watch this space for the next year or 2 years before I think we can have a concrete answer in the terms of the way we're dealing with it. I've recently, for the very first time, had a paper that when I ran it through Turnitin, the dreaded Turnitin, it showed a 70% overlap, an automatic overlap with ChatGPT. And I did not know what to do at first with this. So in other words, they are saying that up to 70% of that paper could have been generated by ChatGPT. I had to go straight back to Taylor and Francis, and had to go straight back to their legal department and legal advice and things like that. And so I think we are being reactive at the moment. I don't have a great answer for you, but I think editors are catching up. We just need to be kept abreast of what's going on and up to date. While the other speakers are having a chance to have a cup of coffee and think, the other thing I just wanted to bring up was there was a bit of chat going on between myself and a couple of people about a paper-based approach to thesis and master's and PhD students, which I brought up, that are sending manuscripts in. It's something we as editors have just got to, it's tricky. On the one hand, you want to support and help people that are sending papers in, but we need to think as an individual journal, really, how far do we go? Because we're still managing the journal. We still got to look after a journal. And so in a way, we are gatekeepers there, but as Betty says, it's a lousy term. But we are being used sometimes where, papers are coming in that aren't ready, and it's because the PhD students want that manuscript. And so I think that's a role that ASIF can play quite strongly to help support people to submit papers that are ready to be supported. Yeah. Then just one other that I picked up, somebody's asking about what platform do we use. That does vary extensively from journal to journal. Taylor and Francis have a particular one. The Journal of Geography Education, we have a different one. I think they're much of a muchness. They really are. Some are easier than others to work through and to deal with. Generally, I find the guidelines to authors not particularly helpful. And they were written, many of them were written years ago, and we've just passed them on. And so I think a lot of journals need to look at that in some more detail. A word out to the wise, to those that are looking to submit manuscripts, at least go through those, because sometimes we get manuscripts that are just so, the person who's just sent it in is almost expecting us to format it again, and that becomes a problem. Sorry, so no real concrete answers, just some thoughts as I'm going on. Thanks.
Thanks, Trevor. Much appreciated. I just want to add to your journal platform discussion. Maybe if in the audience there's somebody that doesn't know, but ASIF helps support open access journal platform in South Africa. So if you're currently still running a journal using emails, etc., then that is something to look at. I haven't got any hands up at the moment, so then I do. Ruth, please unmute yourself and ask your question, make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I think mine is going to be a comment. Although I am, my name is Ruth Aluko. I'm from the University of Pretoria. I'm the editor for Teacher Education Through Flexible Learning. And I'm speaking from experience because our journal has emanated from conference proceedings that we've been publishing since 2009. Then we moved into open access journal in 2019. Now, my comment has to do with the issue of charging of journals prior to the acceptance of the manuscript. And I'm not in support of it, but from my experience, you know, because sometimes I try to look into where people are seated and to see why, you know, to understand the reasons behind some things. And maybe ASAF could come on board to assist in this area. I'm not expecting an answer today, maybe for some other time. And the issue is this: you receive a manuscript, you labored over it, if I could use that terminology, like Trevor said. You work through it, you work with the authors, and at the end of the day, they withdraw the paper. And when they do that to you as an editor, the question is going to be, how do you get rewarded for the efforts that you have put in? Because it takes your time, it takes the time of colleagues working with you and things like that. So I think sometimes journals might be tempted to say, okay, even if this paper is not going to be accepted at the end of the day, all these processes that we take this paper through, let us charge something for that. And I think at some point, even in my career, I've tried to think about it, that could it be a possibility? Because then you deter such, you know, actions from authors. But at the same time, I don't believe that should be something that would be so ridiculous that somebody has to charge, because you are talking of efforts that you have put in, the time that you have spent. Yes, it could be a mentoring method, a way of mentoring others to come on board. But I think, I don't know about other editors' experience, but this has been sometimes, not every time, but sometimes my experience. And you have authors withdrawing their papers, maybe because you have worked through it, it is now at a better standard, and they think they want to take it to another journal, which they think is more reputable than you, and you are new, you know, and things like that. So maybe we need to consider some of these things. I don't believe the rates charge should be high, as I've said, but at the same time, how do we deal with that? There's the need for compensation. You know, we need to think about all these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Ruth, I think you raise very interesting points, and it needs some thinking about. I'm going to ask Professor van der Heever if you've had time to look at the comments and the questions, and maybe if you want to pick up on one or two of those. Thank you.
Yes, a few. One relates to the question about PhD and master students publishing articles, either just the proof of submission or having proof of the actual publication in order to get the degree. I'm severely critical of this practice because your thesis is already in an institutional repository, open access available. So just to cut chapters out of that and to get subsidy for it. And often when I review articles for journals where this happens, authors didn't even go to the trouble to remove the word chapter from the article. So I find it an objectionable practice. And it's we're in this situation because universities don't get enough subsidies from the Department of Higher Education and Training, and most universities, including my own, have some kind of business model where they say they regard published research output subsidies as an income stream. That's pernicious, and really that should be fought. there was just this remark of Godfrey, who spoke about Godfrey Harold, about a very unpleasant situation he found himself in. The only thing I can say is always conduct yourself with dignity, remain above the fray, do your work diligently and ethically, and draw on the support of the publisher, the editorial board. Then there will always be someone who will try to make it as difficult as possible for you, and you have to deal with that. Then there was a question in the chat from Matabu Kao about a journal based in a university faculty where the management does not support the journal. Well, I'm in that situation as well, although the journal Religion and Theology is no longer a faculty journal. It's now independently owned by a big publisher. But the only thing you can do is really advocate and get together as a faculty and make as much noise to your university management as you possibly can. There's not much else you can do than to do activist advocacy. I think that's all I should respond to now.
Thank you, Gerard. Much appreciated. I do want to point out that we've got these conflicting ideals here, though. On the one hand, why would university management listen to us? Because this is an income stream of theirs. But on the other hand, by telling them that is why you need to take it serious, the journals and keeping the journals alive, by using that argument with them, we further entrench this, that a university and doing research is just another profit-seeking activity. So I don't have an answer, but I'm just pointing that out.
I can just quickly respond to that. I've had numerous telephone conversations about this with Johan Mouton. And I know it's a difficult question because, especially for the humanities and social sciences, research output subsidies is almost the only way in which you can fund your discipline. So I know this is a big issue, but it needs to be thought through more, because I find our university institutions exploit this in a very cynical manner. And I think that's something I really react against.
Thanks for that response, Gerard. Much food for thought. Thank you. I'm going to call on Dr. Chuma if you've got any of the points and questions that you want to pick up. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chair. I'll speak to three issues quite briefly. The first is an query about how we can get more people reviewing speedily. This is every editor's nightmare. There is no solution to this. In my case, what I do with my team is, if we have to set our peer review process, the blind review process has to involve at least 2 reviewers. So typically we send a manuscript to 3, in case, in fact, in all likelihood, the one will decline. So sometimes we send even to 4. So it's kind of groping in the dark. But also what we do is, on a regular basis, we follow up. Sometimes we also use our personal networks and connections to say, look, dude, I need that reviewer. So it's a whole, there's no easy solution to that, because reviewers are not out there waiting to review your manuscript and your manuscript alone. So it's a matter of, sort of multiple ways of approaching that. But yeah, it's an issue that concerns all of us. The second issue has got to do with the role of editorial boards. I think that's very important. And as editor, you need to guide that board. Those are at your, they've got collective expertise and experience. Use them to do your peer reviews. They have to be actively involved. One, reviewing for you. Of course, the review is not just, sort of left to the board alone, but you use them at least to do the reviews for you. To also use them to do stuff like, do you have under a new project, special issue for the journal, reviewing the sort of the focus of the field as the field changes. You could use the expertise of the board to guide in terms of where to go in terms of the vision of the journal. So yeah, I think it's important. It's very easy to sort of forget about them, but I think once in a while, get them together, interact with them. I think that's where you get that vision of the journal in addition to, obviously, to peer reviews. The third issue is got to do with either gatekeepers or gateways. There was a question around that. I've got a different opinion. I think as editor, the buck stops with you. It's important. The thing is that you're not chasing away some important information. The peer review process ensures that sort of empirically sound research gets to be published, but you get people sending stuff that is quite nonsensical out there, trying their luck. And if you don't play a role as editor to keep that away, you're going to publish that and you get an egg on your face. There have been journals in our field where people publish articles that they had suspect methodologies. And now with social media platforms and all that stuff, you get your egg on your face, and that does irreparable damage on the journal. So I think the editor has to be responsible for the quality control of the journal, and that is gatekeeping, unfortunately. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Chuma. Much food for thought. I've got a hand raised by Godfrey Harold. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe this is a comment to the panel as a whole. I just received an article to review, but that article came with reviews at the recommendation of the author itself. And if you're using the blind peer review process, is that it ethical or not, where the author recommends reviews for a particular article?
Okay, thanks for that, Godfrey. I've got one panel member that I haven't asked to speak about it, but I don't know if I should put the pressure on Dr. Finch. So I'm asking the rest of my panel to also think about it. And Gemma, if you want to respond, you can. Otherwise, any other issues that you've picked up. Thank you.
Okay. So I knew I drew the short straw here. A lot of the questions have already been dealt with. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. And these are tricky ones where there's no real clear answer, but I think it's worth discussing and raising. So yeah, I mean, the point about developing emerging researchers has been made again and again, and the need for mentorship, but also the issue of the diversity of our editorial teams, which is clearly something that we do need to be focusing on, and also linked to that, improving the diversity of our pool of peer reviewers, just to improve representation. And I think, yeah, especially the point about increasing the diversity of editorial teams, this is obviously a long game, and it is a difficult one to fix, but hopefully we are working towards it and improving in South Africa. I think the option of peer review mentorship starting at the bottom is a nice way to expose a more diverse pool of young researchers to the peer review process. So really, as journals, trying to encourage peer review mentorship is something I think that we should be doing. Obviously, as academics, trying to co-publish with more junior researchers, more junior authors, to bring them up that way, because we've got this issue of papers being submitted that perhaps by master's students that are not of the requisite quality, but by publishing together with more senior academics, hopefully we can start to overcome that. So just encouraging publishing with junior authors, having diverse editorial boards. Obviously an editorial board can draw from a large pool of researchers. So I think making sure that our editorial boards are better representing demographics, gender, and so on is something that we should be aware of and working to improve. And then, I've mentioned the Associate Editor Mentorship Program, so I can put the link into the chat as well for the call that's out at the moment, and try to please encourage young researchers from different groups to apply and let's bring them forward and help to develop people. So we've got to start somewhere with that. And then just something else I wanted to raise, unrelated, the question about author behavior. So submitting manuscripts prematurely that are not good enough quality, or perhaps are being submitted for PhD, that's a separate issue. The question of withdrawing manuscripts late after taking advantage of the journal and the peer review system, that's really not on. Not dealing well with rejection decisions. So essentially, I'm just summarizing some examples here of not great author behavior. But on the other hand, we also sometimes see not great behavior from the side of the peer reviewers, where they can be overly critical, rude, impolite, not constructive, and essentially not doing what they should be. And I just wanted to raise the point about peer review reform and whether moving towards a more open and transparent peer review platform is something that any journals in South Africa are looking at. I don't know how successful that can be, but by making the process more transparent, perhaps it would help to eliminate some of those behaviors and improve collegiality as well. That's me.
Thank you, Gemma. Maybe just a comment on what you've just, the last point you raised, which was open peer review. Most of these things, as you make changes, you often have a mixed bag of benefits and unintended consequences. I can just say from my side, I've often used my PhD students as reviewers. And then when I get that first review back from them, I wasn't happy. They had, so at that point, I would then share some of my reviews with them, and this is what it looks like. So I suppose that's mentorship, but it was a very small pool. It was my students. So this whole discussion today is making me think about how do you roll it out a little bit wider. An open peer review can be definitely form part of such a mentorship process. I've got a hand raised by Gerard. Gerard, please go ahead.
Just on this point about open peer reviewing, a number of years ago, there was a series of 4 articles published in LitNet by Fani de Beer and Bram Roux, unfortunately in Afrikaans. But it was, the series title was Towards Better Science. And one of these articles proposed a system of open peer reviewing. So let it go through a cycle of debate well, what you see on academia.edu, you get invited to comment on a paper that's posted there. Not many people make use of the opportunity, but at least it's there. And maybe that's a way of going. I haven't had personal experience of really nasty reviewers, but if you remove the blindness of the review process, and the reviewer actually has to also take public responsibility for what you say about someone else's work, I think that will help to remove some of the problems we have with the system.
Thanks for that, Gerard. I just want to ask my panel members, we had the question, really just inviting opinions on authors nominating their own reviewers and whether we are comfortable with that as still a rigorous peer review process or whether there are caveats that we should keep in mind. If I can ask my panel members, any opinions, any thoughts? Thanks, Trevor. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I can just add some thoughts on that. You know, I just added to the complexity. A couple of journals have picked up, and there's been articles written about this, where authors have proposed reviewers and they've used created emails, and the invitation has gone back to the authors themselves and they've written their own review. And they've been caught doing this. And so it gets more complicated. There was a couple of papers recently, and I'm not going to mention the journal, luckily it wasn't from South Africa, where they had to, I think it was 9 papers they had to pull because they discovered that this was going on. And it's easy to do if you think about it. You create a new Gmail account, or you can even create a university account, and the invitation will come to you yourself. This is going to go on because there's money involved, because there's subsidies involved, because there's promotions involved. And the better we get at it, the better those who are trying to get around it will get it as well. We're never going to solve those issues, I'm afraid, perfectly. Okay, so on some of the platforms, what happens as soon as the paper gets loaded and you see it as the editor, it uses the keywords and it brings up previous authors that have produced papers with similar keywords for that journal. So you can go through that range. So that helps you with finding reviewers. I've never had a problem with either authors being opposed to 1 or 2 reviewers at most. I've also had no problem. Why not let them suggest names? You know what? And maybe I'm talking out of turn. I often do this with my postgrads. They know the field better than me. I've got to find PhD examiners. You give me the name of 5 people you think should be your examiners and why. I don't have to use that, but it's a way of doing it. And I don't see why authors can't just propose 2 or 3 names. We don't have to use those names at all. It's to my discretion. I'm still going to do my homework on that potential reviewer and see whether I feel that person is appropriate or not. It is a help. I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, we don't have to use those. I don't see why they can't put forward 3 names if they want. And if we decide we want to use one, we use those. Personally, I always go through the paper and I look at who they're quoting and who they're citing, and I tend to find at least one from there. And then I will often try and find one from my own editorial board to help me out. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Valuable insights. We coming to the end of this webinar, time-wise. I see Tawu Sunde that you've got your camera on. Do you want to address the audience, make a comment? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Then, audience, as I've indicated, we've come to the end of this webinar. I'm going to just give a moment here for Susan to interrupt me. Susan, if you're unhappy that I close the session, then please speak up now. Otherwise, I'm going to continue by thanking you as an audience. Thank you for your interaction. Thank you for coming through and listening and wanting to improve and build up science in South Africa. At ASIF, we are there to support you in this endeavor, and let's co-develop science in South Africa. And since I'm chairing, just the final word, why I went into academia is because I was looking for an intellectual environment. And what I'm observing inside university, in South African universities, is that that doesn't seem to be the core mission anymore. But I do think that in the journal space, the space where it's publication, we can still get very close to the intellectual environment. Nice debates around topics of mutual interest, etc. So I want to encourage you as audience and as editors to go ahead there and to build your fields, to build the pipeline of young authors coming through, but also to show what good research looks like. Thank you, everyone. And a special thank you to my panel members. Thanks for your insight, your intellect, your contribution on this. Thanks, everyone. That's the end of the webinar.